The morning Eleanor Ashcombe turned 23. No one in Ashcombe Manor wished her a happy birthday. Not her stepmother, not her stepsister, not even the servants who once smiled at her in secret before fear taught them to lower their eyes whenever she passed. The manor itself seemed to understand. Rain crawled down the tall windows in silver lines. The ancient oak trees bent beneath a restless wind, their branches scraping against the stone walls like long fingernails. Eleanor stood alone in the library, dusting books that had belonged to her late mother. It had been 6 years since Lady Beatrice Ashcombe had died, and in those 6 years the house had slowly forgotten her kindness. Only the books remembered. Eleanor gently traced her fingers across a faded leather spine before sliding it back into place. "You always did love hiding in here." The voice made her turn. Lady Celeste Ashcombe stood in the doorway dressed in dark emerald silk despite the early hour, every silver button polished, every strand of hair perfectly arranged. She smiled. It was the sort of smile that never reached her eyes. "You should be downstairs," Celeste said. "There is much to prepare." Eleanor lowered her head politely. "Yes, Lady Ashcombe." Celeste hated when she called her that. She preferred mother. Eleanor had never used the word, not once. "Guests will arrive before sunset," Celeste continued. "His Grace's representatives are expected before evening." The words settled heavily in the room. His Grace, the Duke of Blackthorn. Every noble family within 3 counties knew why he was coming. After years of refusing every marriage proposal in England, the ruthless Duke had finally agreed to inspect the list of unmarried noblewomen prepared by parliaments as marriage commission. The Ashcombe family had ensured Eleanor's name appeared near the top, not because they wished her happiness, because marrying Eleanor to the Duke would erase the family's crushing debts overnight. At least, that had been the original plan. Eleanor bowed slightly. "I shall finish here and come immediately." Celeste studied her for another long moment before leaving without another word. Only after the footsteps disappeared did Eleanor allow herself to breathe again. She had learned long ago that silence was safer than argument. Silence survived. By noon the manor buzzed with activity. Silver was polished. Crystal chandeliers gleamed. Fresh roses decorated every room except Eleanor's. Her small chamber remained exactly as it had always been. Plain, cold, forgotten. As she fastened the simple blue dress she had repaired herself 3 winters earlier, someone knocked softly. 3 quiet taps. Not the confident knock of a servant, a frightened one. "Come in." The kitchen maid slipped inside and immediately closed the door behind her. Lucy couldn't have been older than 18. Her cheeks were pale. "Miss Eleanor." "What is it?" "I heard something." Eleanor's stomach tightened. Lucy stepped closer until she was almost whispering. "I was bringing wine to Lady Celeste's sitting room, and the door wasn't completely shut." Eleanor waited. Lucy swallowed hard. "I heard your name." That alone wasn't unusual. They were speaking about tonight. Eleanor remained silent. Lucy leaned closer. Lady Celeste said, her voice almost disappeared. "Ere, the Duke must never meet you." For a moment neither woman spoke. The room seemed suddenly smaller. What exactly did she say? Lucy repeated the words carefully. "If Blackthorn sees her alive, everything is lost. Alive, not present. Alive." The distinction wrapped icy fingers around Eleanor's heart. "Did Lady Rosalind say anything?" Lucy nodded. "She asked if it was necessary." "And Lady Celeste?" Lucy looked ready to cry. She answered. The maid closed her eyes. "Accidents happen every day, especially on rainy staircases." A heavy silence settled between them. Finally Eleanor spoke. "Has anyone else heard this?" "No, miss. You must forget it." Lucy's eyes widened. "But, you have a younger brother." "Yes. If Celeste suspects you warned me." The girl understood immediately. Tears filled her eyes. "I'm sorry. You've already done more than enough." Lucy nodded and hurried away. Eleanor remained standing motionless beside the window. She wasn't panicking. Not yet. She was thinking. Lady Celeste had never acted without planning every detail. If she intended an accident, then the accident had already been prepared. That afternoon the rain intensified. Thunder rolled across the valley. The grand staircase leading into the ballroom had been freshly polished, until the marble gleamed like glass. Too much polish. Far too much. Eleanor crouched near the bottom step. Someone had scattered invisible oil beneath the wax. Only a careful eye would notice. She stared for several seconds, then quietly walked away. Not because she believed herself safe, because now she knew. It had already begun. Miles away, black horses thundered through sheets of rain. The Duke of Blackthorn sat silently inside his carriage. Opposite him, Captain Rowan studied another delayed bridge crossing on the map. "The eastern road is flooded, Your Grace. I noticed. We've already lost 23 minutes. The Duke looked through the rain-darkened window. I dislike arriving late. You've never arrived late. A long pause followed. Finally the Duke answered. Today may be the first time. His voice carried no emotion, only certainty. Outside, lightning split the sky. The carriage pressed forward into the storm. Back at Ashcombe Manor, candles filled the ballroom with warm golden light. Music drifted through polished halls. Guests laughed. Champagne flowed. Lady Celeste welcomed every visitor with effortless grace. No one noticed Eleanor standing quietly near the far balcony. No one except Rosalind. Unlike her mother, Rosalind looked frightened. She approached carefully. You shouldn't be here. Eleanor studied her stepsister. Neither should you. Rosalind looked away. Please. Her voice trembled. When Mother tells you to come upstairs, don't. Before Eleanor could answer, Celeste's voice echoed across the room. Eleanor, dear. Every conversation continued uninterrupted. Only Eleanor froze. Celeste smiled sweetly from the top of the staircase. There you are. Guests turned politely. The portrait gallery requires your opinion. Eleanor looked toward the staircase. The polished marble gleamed beneath dozens of candles. Too smooth, too bright, too perfect. Rosalind whispered, I'm sorry, then stepped backward into the crowd, leaving Eleanor alone. She slowly climbed the stairs. 1, 2, 3. Each step echoed louder than the last. Halfway up she smelled lavender, Lady Celeste's perfume. Behind her, much closer than expected, a whisper floated into her ear. You should have accepted becoming my daughter. Eleanor turned instinctively. At that exact moment, a violent shove struck between her shoulders. Her foot landed on the hidden oil. Everything vanished beneath her. She fell. The world became marble, wood, glass, pain. The guests screamed. Her body struck the landing below with a sickening crack before sliding across the polished floor. Blood spread silently beneath her blue dress. For one terrible second, the ballroom became completely still. Lady Celeste pressed both hands over her mouth. Her performance had already begun. Oh, merciful heavens, what a dreadful accident. Outside, less than 3 miles away, a black carriage burst through the rain at full speed. The Duke looked toward the distant lights of Ashcombe Manor. Then he heard it. Not thunder, a church bell. 1, 2, 3 slow tolls. Captain Rowan frowned. Why would they ring the manor bell now? The Duke's eyes narrowed. They aren't welcoming guests. His voice became cold. They're calling for a physician. He leaned forward. Faster. The driver cracked the reins. The horses lunged ahead. The Duke had no way of knowing. He was only minutes late, and someone inside Ashcombe Manor was praying those minutes would be enough. The great oak doors of Ashcombe Manor burst open with a force that silenced every voice in the tame ballroom. Rain swept inside on a cold autumn wind. Standing in the doorway was the Duke of Blackthorn. He was taller than most men remembered, broad-shouldered beneath a charcoal riding coat soaked with rain. Water dripped from the brim of his hat onto polished marble, yet he made no effort to remove it. His steel-gray eyes swept across the room only once. He ignored the musicians, ignored the frightened guests, ignored Lady Celeste's perfectly rehearsed expression of grief. His gaze stopped on the young woman lying motionless at the foot of the staircase. Blood. Far too much blood. For one impossible second, every sound disappeared. Then he moved. He crossed the ballroom with astonishing speed, dropping to one knee beside Eleanor before anyone else even thought to move. His gloved hand pressed gently against her neck. A pulse. Weak. Barely there. Blankets, he ordered. No one moved. I gave an order. The quiet command struck harder than a shout. Servants scattered instantly. Captain Rowan knelt opposite him. My lord. The Duke had already opened Eleanor's eyelids, examining the slow response of her pupils. She struck the edge of the third step. Rowan frowned. You can tell? I can. His hand slid carefully beneath the back of Eleanor's head. Then something caught his attention. Very gently he lifted a strand of her chestnut hair. There, just behind her ear, a small purple bruise was already forming. Not from the fall. From fingers. Someone had grabbed her. Hard. The Duke's eyes lifted slowly toward the staircase. His expression never changed. But something colder entered the room. Lady Celeste stepped forward gracefully. Your Grace, what a dreadful tragedy. The Duke didn't even look at her. When did she fall? Only moments before you arrived. I asked. He finally turned toward her. When? Celeste hesitated. Perhaps? 5 minutes. No. She blinked. I'm sorry? You hesitated. The Duke stood. You are remembering the story you prepared. The ballroom became silent again. Lady Celeste recovered instantly. I don't understand. I know. He looked toward Captain Rowan. Seal the house. Several guests gasped. Celeste's smile faltered. Surely that won't be necessary. It already is. My stepdaughter simply slipped. The Duke's eyes remained fixed on hers. Perhaps. A pause. Until I decide otherwise, no one leaves. Within minutes, the manor transformed. Guards secured every entrance. Carriages were turned away. The celebration ended before dessert had been served. Instead of music, there were whispers. Instead of dancing, questions. Lady Celeste maintained remarkable composure. Too remarkable, the Duke noticed. People who witnessed genuine accidents rarely remained this organized. She comforted guests, directed servants, arranged physicians, explained everything before anyone asked, almost as though she had rehearsed it. Eleanor drifted somewhere between darkness and awareness. Voices echoed around her. Fragments. Internal bleeding. That it barely breathing. That it prepare the carriage. The Trieg. Blackthorn Hall. Someone lifted her carefully. Pain exploded through her ribs. A warm voice cut through the haze. You've survived this long. A pause. Do not choose now to surrender. She wanted to answer. No sound came. Only darkness. 3 hours later, the Blackthorn estate stood against the storm like an ancient fortress. Doctors rushed through brightly lit corridors. The Duke never left Eleanor's side. Professor Alden Herrick, London's finest surgeon, finally emerged from the operating chamber just before dawn. His sleeves were stained crimson. He looked exhausted. Your Grace. The Duke stood immediately. Tell me. The knife missed her heart. The Duke frowned. Knife? The physician blinked. You didn't know? Silence. The wound beneath the broken ribs. He removed his spectacles. Sir, was not caused by the fall. The hallway seemed to freeze. It was caused by a blade. Captain Rowan slowly looked toward the Duke. The physician continued. The fall certainly broke bones, but someone stabbed her first. No one spoke. The Duke's face became unreadable. What kind of blade? A narrow dinner knife. Driven upward. Whoever did it knew anatomy. Another silence. Then, how long? Before the fall? Approximately. This tomb. 30 seconds. The Duke closed his eyes. Only briefly. When he opened them again, something inside them had changed. They pushed her. The physician nodded slowly. That would explain the fractures. The Duke turned toward Rowan. Wake every investigator we have. My lord, I want everyone. The magistrate. The Crown investigators. Our own intelligence office. Every servant. Every guest. I don't care if they were asleep. By sunrise, I want Ashcombe Manor turned inside out. Morning arrived gray and bitter. Lady Celeste sat elegantly in her drawing room, while investigators searched every corner of the estate. She remained calm, almost amused. She had anticipated questions, prepared answers, destroyed evidence, or so she believed. One investigator approached carrying Eleanor's blue slippers. My lady, we found these. Celeste smiled politely. Poor child, they're ruined. The investigator frowned. Curious. What is? There isn't any oil. She blinked. I'm sorry? The staircase was supposedly slippery. He turned the slipper upside down. The soles are perfectly dry. No wax. No polish. No oil. Nothing. Captain Rowan quietly took the slippers. His expression darkened. Someone had cleaned the stairs. After Eleanor fell. Elsewhere, Rosalind sat alone in her bedroom. She hadn't slept. She couldn't. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Eleanor falling. She heard the terrible sound. Then, a gentle knock. Lady Rosalind? She opened the door. Captain Rowan stood outside. We'd like to ask a few questions. She nodded silently. Inside the small sitting room he poured tea. Neither of them touched. You seem frightened. I am. Of whom? She didn't answer. Your mother? Still silence. So he leaned forward. You aren't under investigation, but if someone attempted murder, but remaining silent makes you part of it. Her breathing quickened. She looked toward the closed window, toward the distant trees, then whispered. I told her not to. Rowan remained perfectly still. Tell me everything. Back at Blackthorn Hall, Eleanor finally opened her eyes. Everything hurt, even breathing. Sunlight filtered through tall curtains. She didn't recognize the room. Then she saw him. The Duke sat beside the fireplace reading reports. He hadn't noticed she was awake. Not yet. She studied him. His reputation had always frightened her. People called him ruthless, merciless, cold. Yet, his boots were covered in dried mud. His coat still hung over the chair exactly where he'd thrown it hours earlier. He hadn't even changed clothes. He had stayed, as though leaving had never been an option. Perhaps sensing her gaze, he looked up. Their eyes met. For several long seconds, neither spoke. Finally he stood. You survived. His voice was calm, matter of fact. I was beginning to think you'd refuse. Despite everything, a tiny smile appeared on Eleanor's lips. It wasn't. She winced. One of my intention. Good. He walked closer. The physician's dislike wasted effort. She looked around the unfamiliar room. Where am I? My home. She turned slowly back toward him. Why? The Duke answered without hesitation. Because someone tried to kill you. The words hung in the quiet room. Eleanor closed her eyes. For the first time, someone had said it aloud. Not accident, not tragedy, not misfortune. Attempted murder. She whispered, "You believe me?" The Duke's answer came immediately. No. She looked confused. He continued, "I believe the evidence." A slight pause. "And the evidence is beginning to dislike your stepmother." For the first time in years, Eleanor felt something she had almost forgotten existed. Hope. That same afternoon, a messenger arrived at Blackthorn Hall, carrying a sealed envelope recovered from Ashcombe Manor. It had been discovered hidden beneath a loose floorboard in the old library. The envelope contained only one sentence, written in Eleanor's unmistakable handwriting. If anything happens before His Grace arrives, it was never an accident. The Duke read the line once, then again, very slowly. His jaw tightened. He folded the paper carefully and slipped it into his coat. Then he looked toward Captain Rowan. "Prepare the carriage. Returning to Ashcombe?" "No, to the magistrate." It's time Lady Celeste learned, in Stoat, that perfect plans still leave fingerprints. For the first time in 6 years, Eleanor Ashcombe slept without fear. The room was quiet, except for the gentle crackle of the fireplace and the distant rain tapping against tall windows. Blackthorn Hall felt nothing like Ashcombe Manor. No one watched her footsteps. No one measured every word she spoke. No one expected her to apologize for existing. Yet even in safety, old habits refused to disappear. She woke before sunrise. She folded the blankets neatly. She apologized to the maid who brought breakfast simply for taking longer than she believed she should. The young maid looked confused. "You've done nothing wrong, my lady." Eleanor smiled faintly. "I know," but she wasn't sure she truly did. Across the estate, the Duke stood in his study before the first light touched the hills. Captain Rowan entered carrying a leather case filled with documents. "We have everything." The Duke looked up. "Everything?" Rowan nodded. "Rosalind signed a full statement during the night. The servants have begun talking." The coachman admitted Lady Celeste dismissed 2 footmen the week before the banquet, because they refused to polish the staircase a second time. And he placed one final document on the desk, the bank records. The Duke opened them. Several large debts, mortgages, loans. One document bore Lady Celeste's signature. Another, a letter promising immediate payment once Eleanor Ashcombe could no longer inherit her mother's estate. The Duke read every page in silence. Finally he closed the folder. It wasn't only hatred. No, it was money. By noon, the magistrate issued formal warrants. Ashcombe Manor was surrounded. Guests who had already returned home received summonses. Servants were questioned individually. Every version of Lady Celeste's story began collapsing under its own contradictions. One maid remembered polishing the staircase twice. Another remembered seeing Eleanor and Lady Celeste alone only moments before the fall. The butler recalled hearing an argument. The gardener remembered burning blood-stained linen at Lady Celeste's orders before dawn. Each witness knew only one small piece. Together, they painted a complete picture. Lady Celeste still believed she could escape. She sat in the manor's drawing room wearing black silk, waiting for investigators with remarkable composure. When the magistrate entered, she rose gracefully. "Surely this misunderstanding has gone on long enough." Magistrate Whitmore unfolded a document. "Lady Celeste Ashcombe, I am placing you under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, obstruction of justice, destruction of evidence, and fraud concerning the Ashcombe estate." For the first time, her smile disappeared. "You cannot possibly believe such nonsense." "I don't have to believe it." He calmly handed her the warrants. "I merely have to read the evidence." Rosalind entered the room. Lady Celeste turned sharply. "My dear." Rosalind didn't move. She looked as though she had aged years in only days. "I told them." Silence. "You." Lady Celeste stared at her daughter in disbelief. "You what?" "I told them everything." The room seemed to shrink. "You foolish girl." Tears rolled down Rosalind's face. "I watched Eleanor fall. I watched you leave her there. I can't carry it anymore." Lady Celeste stepped forward. "You ungrateful child." Before she could reach Rosalind, 2 constables stepped between them. Steel handcuffs closed around Lady Celeste's wrists. For the first time in years, she had no control over the room. News spread across the county before sunset. The ruthless Duke himself had demanded the investigation. The elegant Lady Celeste had been arrested. The famous Ashcombe family had collapsed overnight. People who had once admired the household suddenly claimed they had always suspected something was wrong. The Duke ignored every rumor. He cared only about one conversation. That evening, he found Eleanor sitting alone in the Eastern Library. A thick book rested open in her lap. She wasn't reading. She was staring through the window toward the distant hills. "You should be resting," she smiled gently. "I've rested enough." He walked closer. "The physicians disagree. They also insist I drink terrible tea. They are correct about both." A quiet laugh escaped her before she realized it. It surprised them both. "I haven't laughed in—" She searched for the words. "I don't remember." The Duke didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled another chair beside hers and sat. Neither spoke for several minutes. The silence felt comfortable, not empty. Finally, Eleanor asked, "Why did you come?" The Duke looked toward the rain beyond the glass. "I saw you once." She frowned. "I don't remember." "You wouldn't. It was 2 years ago." He leaned back slightly. "There was a charity school outside York. The children had almost no books. You arrived alone, wearing a plain blue dress. You spent the afternoon repairing torn pages instead of attending the luncheon held in your honor." Eleanor blinked. "You were there?" "I watched from across the courtyard. You never introduced yourself." "No." "Why?" He smiled faintly. "Because everyone behaved differently whenever they realized who I was. I wanted to know who you were, or before you knew who I was." She lowered her eyes. "I wasn't anyone important. You repaired books with your own hands. You shared your inheritance with strangers. You wrote letters for widows who couldn't write. You visited orphanages without telling anyone." He met her eyes. "I've spent years surrounded by people desperate to impress me. You were the first person I met, who never tried." Tears gathered slowly in Eleanor's eyes. Not from sadness, from relief. Someone had seen her, long before tragedy, long before rescue. Someone had noticed. A week later, the trial began. The courtroom overflowed with spectators. Lady Celeste entered wearing prison gray instead of silk. She looked smaller, older. The confidence that had ruled Ashcombe Manor was gone. Rosalind testified first. Her voice shook. She admitted every lie, every conversation, every order. Every moment she chose silence over courage. When she finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. Then Eleanor stood. The room became completely still. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't seek revenge. She simply told the truth. About loneliness. About fear. About surviving in a house where kindness had become dangerous. When she finished, even the court clerk needed several moments before continuing. The verdict required less than an hour. Lady Celeste was found guilty on every charge. Rosalind received a reduced sentence because of her cooperation and genuine remorse. As constables led Lady Celeste away, she turned toward Eleanor one last time. "I gave you everything." Eleanor shook her head quietly. "No, you took everything. And somehow, I survived anyway." Lady Celeste said nothing more. The courtroom doors closed behind her. For good. Months passed. Winter surrendered to spring. The Ashcombe estate was restored, according to Lady Beatrice's original will. Part of its income now funded schools, hospitals, and orphanages throughout the county, exactly as Eleanor's mother had once dreamed. One afternoon, Eleanor stood beneath an old oak tree in the gardens of Blackthorn Hall, reading quietly. The Duke approached carrying 2 cups of tea. "I've brought the physician-approved version." She accepted one with a smile. "I suppose I'll survive. I sincerely hope so." She looked at him over the rim of her cup. "You're smiling. I've been informed it happens occasionally. So the rumors are true." "What rumors?" "That the ruthless Duke isn't quite as ruthless anymore." He considered the accusation carefully. "They're mistaken." "Oh? I remain ruthless." She raised an eyebrow. Only now, he looked directly at her. "I'm ruthless about protecting the people I care about." The breeze stirred the branches overhead. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence felt familiar now. Comfortable. Like home. Finally, Eleanor closed her book. "You know, I was afraid the day you arrived. I believed you were coming too late." The Duke looked toward the distant road where his carriage had first appeared months earlier. "So was I." He reached gently for her hand. "I was only minutes late." She squeezed his hand softly. "But not too late." The church bells echoed across the valley, not as a warning, not in mourning, but in celebration of a future neither of them had believed they would ever have. And beneath the wide spring sky, surrounded by blooming gardens instead of whispered threats, Eleanor finally understood something she had spent years searching for. Home was never a place. It was the first person who arrived and refused to leave.